let's progress on to the first panel discussion that we have today. So the topic of discussion would be India's electricity sector transition. So I would like to first call the moderator for this session, that is Dr. Rahul Tongia, Senior Fellow at CSEP. So big round of applause. Then I would like to invite Dr. Satish Agnihotri, Professor, IITB. I would like to invite Dr. Rahul Walawalkar, MD and President, CSEP. And I would like to invite Mr. Pramod, former Chairman, CERC. Dr. Pramod, former Chairman, CERC.
Good afternoon. This is the post-lunch period, and so we hopefully will keep the energy high. But it's interesting that I have not only a very distinguished set of colleagues, friends, or mentors in this space here, but we have 4 PhDs, doctors, all of us. So you were cured of having a PhD. Sorry? Well, yes, how many PhDs does it take to change a light bulb? But my sort of phrase for this is, PhD plus 10 rupees will get you chai. PhDs are a tool for certain needs. They're a learning experience. But there's absolutely a need, maybe a stronger need, for people who convert that. So you can have a PhD and do it, like Dr. Walawalkar does, or through government, which both of you have done through your leadership and your work. But I remain an academic at heart and an advisor or scholar or tinkerer in practice. And so it's my pleasure to be here to help celebrate, of course, CES is 25 years, but also reconnect and connect with new experts. I mean, 180 people was not a number I knew. I knew of the slightly older number. And so that itself is remarkable. And I think that speaks about a change in the power sector, which has become less monolithic, less centralized, less, we know the answer and it's just a question of go implement it. And so I think the biggest change in the power sector is we're still struggling to figure out what the future can look like and should look like, and more importantly, how do we get there? And so that is the journey CES is involved with, that is the journey many of us scholars are involved with, and the government is also grappling with it, because traditionally the electricity sector has been about supply, quality supply, 24/7, inclusive. These were the guiding principles. Then over the last maybe decade or two, environmental aspects grew as a concern, and climate change is just one of them. From an Indian perspective, local air pollution, for example, which comes from fossil fuel use, not entirely just from electricity, but disproportionately in aggregate for some aspects, is a very strong factor. So 1998 is the start of the journey, and that was the year of one of the landmark changes in the power sector. Of course, Dr. Deo was there, Dr. Agnihotri, and many of you will know the history. But without attempting to summarize it, our reforms in some ways really started in 1991, as you're aware, when it was a supply-side push bringing in foreign investment and focusing on generation. It was only in the late 90s, even slightly before 98, where distribution and unbundling or restructuring was the mantra. And that journey has had fits and starts. Today, only 2 states are privatized. Delhi, which was the second, Orissa, which privatized, then unprivatized, reprivatized, and so forth, is now in the hands of Tata Power. But most states have not privatized in India for a range of reasons. And so that is one arc. So if I look at the transitions that are unfolding in the power sector, they talk about the 3 Ds. Decarbonization, well known. decentralization, less well understood, and digitalization, which is not just smart grids, but much more. And so a lot of these converge through how do we think about markets? How do we think about consumers? I mean, that magic word, your early work focused a lot on consumers in the US, and consumers worldwide are what the power sector is about. And we have to ask ourselves, when any policy is there, including, let's say in India, the famous bogeyman, free power for farming. A lot of the distortions in the sector are placed on the feet of farming, but who actually benefits from these? So as one of our studies pointed out, 55% of farmers are laborers. They don't have land. Another fraction, 12-ish%, then this is older census data, so clearly it would have shifted now, are canal-based. Then you've got a small fraction on diesel irrigation. And then you've got a fraction in the order of 15, 18% that have no irrigation. And so you're left with only a subset enjoying the subsidized or free power. So these are the sorts of tricky and vexing policy questions, because the one phrase I would sort of throw out and would welcome reactions is the energy transition is not just about a path forward, but about winners and losers and trade-offs. So with this, I will close my introductory thoughts and now request all of our esteemed panelists. I will not attempt to give the bios of Dr. Deo, Dr. Agnihotri, or Dr. Walawalkar. Stephen had mentioned a little bit about them. Of course, you've been a regulator, you've been heading MNRE and many other departments, but now you're more interested in education and innovation, I would think. So maybe we can hear a little about that. And Dr. Walawalkar, you are, of course, the glue that has been putting a lot of this together in the Indian energy, especially energy storage landscape. So I would like to now request Dr. Deo to share some opening thoughts, and then there are a few guided questions, including, just as a maybe simplified view of the world, what has happened or what have we done? And the flip side of that is, what have we not done? Over to you, Dr. Deo. Maybe awesome. No lights, no indicator.
No indicator. Yes. I think that represents the state of power sector today. Because Rahul has said very good things about the power sector. And I'm not only a regulator, I've been also promoting renewable energy to begin with. In 2000, we are in 2009. Plans going back to 2000, see, I'm looking into 2000, it is not, 1986, that we set up Maharashtra Energy Development Agency. That was to promote renewable energy. And simultaneously, Orissa obviously had, that was one of the much better organized, well-resourced. Here started. Of course, there also, at first cyclone, destroyed all the wind farms they had set up. But anyway, what I remember in '86 when we started, it was a great thing. Maharashtra government had obviously decided that there has to be zero-based budgeting. That means there should be no staff. We will be sanctioned staff only after cabinet considers it. So the result was I was left with no staff. I was alone. Now obviously you cannot do your work alone. So I had to find a way out. Only way out was that I found that I had money in my MEDA account. So using that MEDA account, I said, let us now start by using contracting approach, which was again very alien to government culture. Everybody said, what is this wrong with First important thing is, I said I need a good chartered accountant. Because that's the first thing that I will face criticism in tomorrow audit. So that is one thing taken care of how we spend the money. And I still remember, I had come back from Bangkok, I was at AIT, and there was some assistant in Mantralaya that had given me a chair and table to sit. So I gave him some money, I said, you go and get some transparency. Because those were the days we had the audit. You don't have anything. So he said, we had to send a requisition downstairs. I said, okay, part of
Just no indicator but it left.
So anyway, come to shop. He didn't understand what is to be done. I said, I gave you money from my own pocket. I said, near Churchgate, there is a shop. From there you get the transparency, etc. That's all. And I still remember that time MNREs, it was MNES, was focused really on only some kind of pilot demonstration project. Basically, we started building up community biogas plant and industrial biogas plant, institute of biogas. And that also we used one of the private company, they had all the youngsters were there. They came and started working on a contract. So this was the only solution, not having a staff. So again, that's how we started. I still remember, if you talk of the renewable energy, great thing was that we had provided a television in a remote tribal village in Nashik. So that itself was a big event for the people there. Because anyway they had not seen electricity. There was no possibility of getting electricity in the near future. But with this solar TV, in the evening they would watch. At that time, Doordarshan used to have only one channel. The second channel was started. That second channel used to be really the entertainment channel. And everybody, all the villages used to gather. That was a great thing. That's it. Anyway, the native I went to the Ministry of Power and all that. But more important in '93, when I was in the Ministry of Power, we started, before '93, '89, Energy Management Center. But today we have a Bureau of Energy Efficiency. That was the Energy Management Center. We started with that. So I have gone through all these phases. I mean, I was in Ministry of Power, on the first in the ministry side, and then I went out in Energy Management Center, and which has been now become under the Electricity Conservation Act. Because see, both the acts, Energy Conservation Act and Electricity Act, they're supposed to be notified simultaneously. But there was a long time taken, it was not happening. So that's why you find that Energy Conservation Act came. It's very interesting in that act, when the regulator did not exist, any penalty has to be imposed. The hearing will be held by the Regulatory Commission. That is given there. So it is very difficult because you didn't have that organization or institution. That was given there. So anyway, now you will know what is Bureau of Energy Efficiency and all that. So it is again this background. I still remember that when I migrated to regulator board, Secretary Energy, Maharashtra, from that first constituted. And that was under the 98 Act. So the 98 Act is not a very revolutionary act. What it was the tariffs. Tariffs for the state electricity board. So that was their mandate. And there were many powers which could be given by state government. But it was state government discretion. So there was no question of state government giving any power because after all the electricity board functioned as an extension arm of regulatory. So concept as regulatory commission, maybe they will decide tariff and all this thing. So that's how it started. But the history is that all the chief ministers in the National Development Council had agreed and a group was set up under Sharad Pawar, who was chief minister of Maharashtra, and it was decided that there will be independent commission for deciding the tariff. So that's how the Energy Conservation Act came. And finally, in 2003, we have a combined integrated 2003 Act. Now one of the, I've shared many sessions with Rahul, and I can tell you that 2003 Act, the real vision of that, it does not talk about privatization at all. It talks about market development, creating competition. And that was the idea was that open access. The open access idea is that obviously consumer can decide from where to buy electricity. And this is the one main problem, because after that, now many things have happened now. Now the center has been very aggressive. Center has been giving very aggressive targets. So I will not go into the numbers, but what they had done, simple thing is that those targets, and also recently they came with a very bright idea under the Energy Conservation Act. They have specified consumption targets for the certain class of consumers. So you have a conflict. You have a regulatory commission deciding what will be the purchase obligation. Then you have now Energy Conservation Act deciding. But in the meantime, central government since 2014 December has been trying to amend the Electricity Act 2003. So there have been many drafts, but no draft has been cleared. And the reason is the peculiar nature of electricity sector in India. And that problem comes in states are controlling that, they don't want to give up that one part. But other main issue comes in what will happen to subsidy that is given to agriculture. And that is the big thing. If you just look at Maharashtra, Gujarat, entire industrial sector, you find that Maharashtra is just 1 lakh large consumers. They contribute something like 45% of electricity money. Finance, agriculture sector. As far as the residential is concerned, there is no difficulty. There also there is a gross subsidy, but it is gross subsidy within. So it is a higher end consumer. And many people must have noticed with the recent tariffs that they are getting, the bills are shot up. Because of that burden is passed on to finally the residential consumer. But real question remains is that if you have open access, there have been many open access, I have got those figures, I don't want to go into detail, but as soon as you allow open access, then what will happen? So what the Energy Conservation Act does is, it also prescribes that if you are an open access consumer, still you will have to procure by certain renewable energy. Now, legal matter is something, in the meantime, central government, either the state government, have prescribing very low targets for renewable energy. So they have gone ahead and under the rules, they are still draft state. They have to prescribe what states shall be doing. Now that goes totally against the constitution. Because electricity remains a concurrent list. So it is not that the central government can do it. But the argument given is the rule making power. The rule making power is again under that it is binding. Now binding under what? So if you have any young people who have come to your advice, I'll advise them to become a lawyer and specialize in electricity. Because there is going to be a lot of business and it will continue. Because there is no solution to this. Because in Maharashtra, if you take, you have got 4.3 million agricultural consumers. Every year you add 100,000. I'm just using the million because otherwise you will get confused. So it is 43 lakh. You add 1 lakh new consumers in agriculture. And they are, at least in Maharashtra, they are supposed to be metered, but they can't be metered. That's also a reality. So you have unmetered. There are certain states like Punjab, Haryana, they don't have any metering for agriculture. I mean, Tamil Nadu also does not have. So now the question comes in, how do you sustain? How do you sustain your electricity board which are for DISCOM? So DISCOMs are having this perpetual problem. But there is no solution of mind. How can you now ask all the consumers, large consumers, who can have open access? But they cannot have open access unless they fulfill certain obligations of purchasing renewable energy. But if they start doing that, and in fact they will have no difficulty now, because since the prices have dropped, storage has been accepted now, and the World Bank has started funding storage. So that will happen. But if that happens, then the entire power system collapses. Because you still have got that state electricity board, new avatar, which we call discom. So discoms cannot survive. There is no way. And from where you give the money? The only solution I have found, to some extent, which is again is not going to happen overnight, is this solarization agriculture pumps. So this is something which should have been done long ago. Because even now today, all the rich farmers who are growing cash crops, if they are given solar pumps, they can consume obviously the conventional, no doubt, but that will really remove the bread butter. And that funding will have to come only from central. But the states will not have money to handle this. Because this is the real issue. How do you really make the program viable? To make it viable, there is only way central government has to realize that there has to be a grand program. And the advantages of decentralized electrification, particularly using solar, wind, and also biomass, are many. So those are the things which we need to do. So I thought that as a developer of energy, renewable energy, then as a regulator, when we are asking for a solution, I feel let's start working on that. That also will require money, which central government has to provide. So state government also can contribute to some extent. But unless you do that, you will continue to have more and more seminars, we continue to discuss this. There will be some movement, no doubt. But the real problem is not going to be solved. Because there is no way, just take Gujarat, you find that 56% of the revenue for the discom there comes from the industrial consumers. Whereas the agricultural consumers, they are not given free electricity, they are given electricity not at the rate the regulatory commission decides, they are given at a further reduced, and for that state government gives subsidy from the budget. And Maharashtra, Gujarat, these are the states. There are other states also who give this subsidy directly, and they can afford to do that because there is the electricity duty. Now the electricity duty is something which only the state government can impose. Now there are two judgments of High Court, Andhra and Karnataka. So the Supreme Court has not been challenged in the Supreme Court. The High Court has said the state governments can do that, electricity duty. So you have electricity duty, which you again will find is increasing now. If you have to start looking at the bill, because many people don't know how to read their own bill.
How many of you here have looked at your electricity bill? Wow, so you are not a typical citizen of India.
No, see, you have a very knowledgeable crowd. And otherwise, people don't understand. They only say, oh, see, another interesting thing I must mention here. They say that electricity is so cheap in BSP area. So again, there is a myth about that Mumbai has competition, parallel lines. Now I want to make it clear there is no competition. What has happened historically, BSP was supplying electricity and also providing transport. But providing transport all over Mumbai. So when the Electricity Act 2003 came, our first tariff order, we made it very clear that the transport sector cannot be subsidized by agriculture. And finally the Supreme Court has upheld that. So the result is that you have got old power purchase agreements in the BSP area. So that's why the electricity is very cheap. So even if you are using 10 air conditioners, you will find that your bill will not exceed 25,000. But as far as you cross Mahim Creek to go, first earlier people used to blame. It was not BSC, it was taken over by Adani, not Adani, Ambani. It was Ambani. The simple fact is that what happened is the open access, that is again a matter which went up to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said, why can't we have a parallel access? To have a parallel licensing in Mumbai is impossible. For the simple reason, you have to use the same network. Because under the development regulation, you can't even provide space for a transformer. So if there is a second thing, we can't have a parallel thing. So we are talking, what is happening is MNRE is involved in litigation. They are trying to work out kind of a cross subsidy that should be given. And the best example was that when this was happening, the so-called open access, Tata had started acquiring some consumers, but they were supplying historically to Mahindra's L&T, because they were supplying to large customers. But when they started pushing over PSEP area, the matter came to us, and then we gave this order in July 2003. But actually, to the Act 2003 had come into force. So that should have been end of that. But the fact remains is that 2003 has a universal application. A universal application is very important. Whosoever is applying has a universal obligation to supply electricity. So the result was that Mumbai airport was taken over by that time Ambani, taken away from Ambani, and Tata started supplying. And all the slums were left to be supplied by, which has a disastrous political impact. Because you will find that all the middle class in suburban area, their bills went up. After that, MNRE has been trying to do some kind of a cross-subsidization and trying to do that through restriction. So this is a problem. So it's not again get carried away saying that, oh, we'll have parallel licensing, that will solve the problem. So basically, you are still left with this thing, how to subsidize agriculture, to what extent it has to come. So that's why I thought that we can go on discussing this, but there is no solution. Only solution is that best thing is spend money, keep spending money, let the government solarize the concept. They will still have backup as a grid connectivity, but at least we have dealt with the issue of agriculture very politically. And as you know, in the last Karnataka election, Prime Minister talked about revenue sector. But this time you see 5 states are going, nobody is talking about revenue culture. Everybody is only giving revenue. So now, from where do you get this money? So in electricity also, you have a revenue culture. That means, again, people thinking about, why can't you meter agriculture? It's impossible to meter agriculture. You can spend money on agriculture. On one hand, we talk about smart meter. And there is no point going for smart meter for people who have low consumption. Because in residential, you will find that it is the top 10%, which will cost subsidize on 90%. They have been doing that. That can continue because there is no point. Best thing is you give them a prepaid bill. So at least you will put some kind of a ceiling on how much they can consume. And that you can work out. That what will be requirement. The requirement is not like the old days because of the LED. Actually, people now can have, they can easily also go for a, they must have a TV. Without TV you can't live now even in slums. You have to go and walk the Harabi and you will know that what's happening there. So that is the picture. So that's why we can take it. So I thought that these are the broad things. And this is the thing. But nobody wants to really address it. We keep talking about open access, competition. But how will you bring competition? How unless you can address the basic issue? How agriculture will be supplied electricity? The way politicians want. And if that is the case, somebody has to pay for it. And how that comes? It can't come from all other consumers. And open access now, private sector will be very happy today with the storage available becoming, prices dropping of renewable energy. They will go for, they say we don't need electricity. That's why under the Energy Conservation Act, I found this very strange thing. Those who are not even taking electricity from anyone, they also have been given obligation for renewable purchasing. Which is fine, they won't mind now. But then this is we are dealing with this thing. There's a lot of law and they are confusing them. Because one is not willing to address the basic fundamental issue.
The root issue.
We have to cross-subsidize certain section. how will we do it? And how long will we have to do it? That can be worked out. But we have to do that, otherwise we'll keep going round in circles, keep talking about competition. Say, oh, I will stop here. Obviously, you can assure me on this.
We'll come back to some details. The devil is in the details because, you know, even though renewables are cheaper, there's a time of day aspect, for example, that is yet to be resolved. And storage is part of the solution, demand response, and so many other techniques are there. Maybe half just said become lawyers. Hopefully lawyers only follow the actual deployments, then you fight about it. We shouldn't fight about it before you deploy the stuff. So maybe we also do need more skilled people doing policy and regulatory analysis, because that is also getting much more complex. It's not just a CA or an accountant that can do it, because there's uncertainty, there's risk, and there's financial implications of there's risk. But end of the day, I think your point is spot on, that it is about the political economy aspects. Electricity in India, but also worldwide, is a very political beast. Every place where you say, oh, the market takes care of it, well, A, you still need regulation. B, even in places with markets, you have things where, well, when the market works in one direction, people love it. The moment the markets discover a price that's 3x higher, a la Europe and post-Ukraine, well, then they say, well, then clearly this market is broken. So we have to understand what markets can and cannot do, and the political or policy choices of how we handle those who cannot pay, who are unable to pay, and maybe should not pay, is something. But of course, then the flip side is, you know, in the agriculture we talked about, this is an election year, free power seems to be one of the things that is percolating, not just to farmers, but even households, and then which households? In Delhi and Karnataka, we're seeing between 90 and 97% of households getting subsidized or free electricity. That is clearly not the poor. That is not even just the middle class, that has gone further. I would now like to turn to Dr. Agnihotri for some thought. You mentioned pump sets. So this is also another question. Okay, you'll come to that. But I've talked to people in the state that created the pump set farmer issue. First, that state said free pump electricity for farmers. Fine, because as somebody points out today when it's in the courts, well, one person's free is another person's support. So what's a free now? Then it was an engineer, SEB head, who in that state said, well, if the farmers are getting free power, then why do I need a meter on them? That's a waste of money. And that little bit of cost saving right there has led us down a path that is hard to control Z. So we're not able to undo that manifestation. Dr. Agnihotri.
Thank you. Pardon me if I will be a little candid. I have left the government quite some time back and I am in academics. And also I go to the field because our students go and spend 2 months in peak summer in a preferably backward village, and they stay with non-rich household. That tells you the fundamentals of what Bharat is. India is what I think we have been talking about. I'll just go a bit down the memory lane as Dr. Dev also did. Incidentally, my PhD is in gender disparities, not renewable energy. But then that sensitized me to the fact that if there is only one bulb in the house, it will never be in the kitchen. Okay? Because when my colleague was implementing this 7 million solar reading lamp project, we started with 50,000, went to 100,000, then 1 million, and then 7 million. Many of those solar reading lamps would go bad because either some vegetable or dal will fall on it, or the lamp will fall in some dal. I said, how come that's happening? No, so we're sitting in the kitchen and studying. Why were you sitting in the kitchen and studying? Because there is no lattu, there's the bulb. And mother said, if you are studying in any case, come here and sit. So it was an eye-opener. Incidentally, I learned fixing a bulb before I did my PhD. And that fixing the bulb literally involved picking up a bucket of shit. Yes, human wastage. Because we were trying to do a biogas plant run on human waste. And no one wanted to pick up the bucket first. And that was my moment of reckoning. If I don't pick it up, no one else is going to follow. And it helped to some extent because the Agnihotri picking up a bucket of shit becomes a news. A regular scavenger doing it is part of his dharma. Okay? So anyway, so I picked up the bulb fixing little earlier. I also happened to be the first, the founding Renewable Energy Development Agency head of CEO of Oreda, which Dr. mentioned. And we had the audacity, way back in 1985, and Rajesh will vouch for it, a 22 kilowatt microgrid in Simlipal forest, where the lead oxide batteries, thanks to Professor Hiranyaya Saha's advice and capacity building, they lasted for 10 years. Okay? Not too bad a job. Government made a mistake which they normally don't do. They made me CEO of the Renewable Energy Development Agency because of my background from IIT. Normally, if you do your master's in renewable energy, probably they will put it as secretary disability welfare. And if you do PhD in gender, then they will put you as secretary steel and mines. But in my case, they made me chief executive of the renewable energy. Not just once, they made me CEO twice, which helped me when I came to renewable energy department as secretary. And there I followed a modus operandi of working more as a wicket keeper. Because I think at the secretary level or in my service, the administrative service, everybody wants to play from the position of the center forward. There's no goalkeeper position, half back. You don't want to be a defender, and in cricket they say wicket keeper. So I thought it was a better idea to play from the position of wicket keeper. It shows you a lot of power play that is going on. And it also sensitized me to what we did not do, the question which Rahul asked. Because that time, there was a cat and mouse game between the Ministry of Power and the Ministry of Renewable Energy. So if you are, first is you are called a bit player, so you are not giving energy in critical chunks. Therefore, you are to be dismissed lightly. But if you ask for subsidy, Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Power will come down on you with a heavy hand, as if you are guilty for the current account deficit of the country. And in a EFC meeting, I actually said to the Finance Secretary, much to his consternation, I said, yes, I plead guilty as a 2,600 crore department for spoiling the current account deficit of the country by asking for 200 rupees subsidy extra on every chula, whereas Fertilizer Secretary comes, sits, says 87,000 crores subsidy will not do. I want 92,000 crores. So 5,000 crore increase gets cleared in a manner of how many seconds? Can anyone guess? 30 seconds flat. Okay, so that's the scenario. Luckily, this whole, the Pandit projection that India's electrification will take 35 years, 65 years, 75 years, depending on the constraint, were demolished very clearly through political fiat. And I'm not just talking of the central government and the Prime Minister. One state chief minister says, oh, center wants to do it by 2020 December. I want the damn thing by 2019 December. Okay? What you guys do is your business. Which was also an important lesson. Political push is a sufficient condition for what you think cannot be done for the poor of India. It may not be a necessary condition. Okay? Still, what we did not do enough decentralization. Even today, you are talking in terms of big central production, but not distributed production. Whereas simple algebra tells you that capital N multiplied by epsilon is the same as epsilon multiplied by capital N. But this is a lesson which power sector hasn't learned, though there has been a considerable sobering down of the power sector, but still that cat and mouse game goes on. Interesting example of this was, we are by the way extremely comfortable with subsidies, and particularly subsidy given to the industry, not to the small consumer. For small consumer, sir, it becomes revenue. For a big guzzler, big defaulter who can walk away from my country with 7 suitcases, with ID people not noticing the suitcases at the airport, that doesn't become a revenue by any chance. Okay? So much for the revenue bit, and let me illustrate it by one example. Here is a chairman of the State Electricity Board who says, okay, get me a list of top 100 defaulters. And then shiver goes down, spine of very many people, and it turns out that the top 3 defaulters don't belong to agriculture sector. There are 3 industries. And he chuckles and says tomorrow's newspaper headline will be these 3 names. This chairman had been asking the government for central deputation for last 3 years, which was not being considered. When this decision was taken in the afternoon to bring out these names of 3 guzzlers who were biggest defaulters, he got his order for central deputation by 8 o'clock in the evening. He was asked to hand over charge by 9 o'clock and join his duty in the national interest next day morning before breakfast. Okay? So when we talk of Revdi, we have to somewhere ask ourselves, is the anti-poor, anti-farmer being under our skin speaking up? And pardon me for saying so, that seems to be the case. Okay? Then we also have this comfort about subsidy, and we don't hammer down the cost by large, steady volume of business. And I'm glad that ESL has followed that, and that has helped us. But that needs to be done on a bigger and more frequent scale. As Secretary Renewable Energy, and I had the second audacity was to bring out, I think some of you will be aware, that 750 megawatt tender, where 375 was the Indian suppliers and 375 were foreign suppliers. What was told to me by my colleagues, experts, well-wishers, even my own batchmate who was in FICCI, which is supposed to take care of the Indian industry, कि यार तू मत कर ऐसा. Now why yaar should not do ऐसा? Because he says you will ask for 375. Indian industry is not even capable of up to 100 megawatts. I'm a little impatient bureaucrat by nature. So I said, okay, if I spectacularly fail, I'm prepared for it, that remaining gap, I'll give it to the foreign bidders. What happened in reality? The Indian bids were oversubscribed, I think 1.3 times. Foreign were subscribed much more. The price gap was less than a rupee per unit, which India, the sovereign republic, if we are, was well able to afford. And first time, the price crashed below the psychological barrier of 7 rupees. Again, when the psychological barrier of 7 rupees was breached, and Rahul will bear me out, both the Rahuls will bear me out, what did I plead? Be a little strategic. Don't keep thumping your nose at the power sector and say, hey, we have now gone to 6.5 rupees and now we are going to 6 and now we will go to 5. Use this gap to tell the supplier that pass this energy through a rock steady supply through a storage, so that the power department doesn't hobble you by saying frequency band. The frequency band incidentally was narrowed down on purpose when renewable energy started giving the energy. Okay, so let's be very blunt about it. You allowed the free fall from 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. You didn't bother about the storage then.
Yes, sir.
So the Indian Storage Alliance is entitled to ask this question, which a Urdu शायर had asked, कि जब पास से गुजरे तब हाल तक न पूछा, अब कैसे यकीन करें हम कि आप दूर जाके हुए हैं. That is what sensitized me again to the fact that I can't push the case of an individual storage entrepreneur, because then the vigilance or the CBI, now the ED, would not be far behind. So I will be asked on the last day of my retirement, why were you doing a good job? Okay? So I told Rahul that if there is a storage alliance, then I am paid to promote their interest. And this was a lesson which I learned as DG Shipping when I used to interact with the Indian National Shipping Association. And I told in a meeting, I said, look, you don't have to be, I'm not doing you a favor. I'm getting my salary to push Indian National Shipowner Association's interest. So that was the genesis of the alliance, and I'm grateful to CES for supporting it and the shape it has taken. But I still feel, had we used that delta X in the free fall with the 7 rupees, today's storage story would have been much, okay, let me put it this way. Your score on the scoreboard would have been much more. Your asking run rate would have come down. Right now, I still feel, notwithstanding all this is another folklore. Storage costs are coming down. They are in tandem with the PV reduction. Excuse me, PV reduction asking run rate is not what you are talking about. Storage asking run rate is still going up. Okay, so you need to score faster. Okay, so that is another sobering thought. Finally, I also have to caution when we talk of storage. Let's get out of this fetish of battery alone as the storage. We keep parroting, grid is the best battery. I didn't know all of this. My PhD was in gender, okay? Though I did my MTech in 1980, so I'm entitled to forget all that. But I'm told that battery grid is the best battery. Why can't we look at कि और भी गम है जमाने में बैटरी के सिवा? So why can't we think of battery plus? Now what is that battery plus? It can be steam stored at 15 bars, I don't care. It can be water shaft. When I'm talking of water shaft, I'm not talking of theory. We have replaced that big water tank which is put outside the village in the outskirts with big distribution system cost. A colleague of mine has done it, not me. 14-meter tall pipe, 300-meter dia, which is literally पानी का खंभा, and has said अगर बिजली के खंभे से बिजली मिलती है तो पानी के खंभे से पानी क्यों नहीं मिलता है? If you use that and use your imagination, what is this picohydro business? कितना head चाहिए? Make your own calculation. Which is where we have to be imaginative and look at these other storage potentials. Combine them with this completely idle solar pump potential sitting there. That's 7.5 HP pump. And you must get mesmerized at India's ingenuity. Solar pump, which was essentially meant for small plot holder, and you have 12 crore, 120 million for those who don't know, small farmers. उसको ठोक पीट के 5 HP, 7.5 HP बना दिया. Out of 365 days, how many days is it idle? More than 200. What are you doing with that energy? Why can't that be the hub and you have spokes of storage, which gives livelihood? So please think about it. That's a challenge that I'm giving to you. And we also discovered, to our surprise, there's a huge niche for micro enterprise at less than 1 kilowatt. And I'm chasing a NGO, big NGO, to prepare a monograph monograph. In IIT, I have got this bad habit. मेरे सामने जो पढ़ जाता है, give him an assignment. I gave assignment to Rajarshi just 2 hours back. So he regrets why he, came, why he came before, right? So I think this is something which we need to seriously think about. Finally, I'll also suggest that CES needs to become Ola or Uber of chota service providers. Let's not get into what Sarkar does, Sarkar doesn't do. Okay? We'll discuss that slightly differently. And bring these efficiencies. My last point is, there's a governance issue here. In my Anil Agrawal lecture, which was followed by a monograph which was brought out by them, I have shown that a hilly Uttarakhand and a hilly Himachal is able to reach electricity to a much more interior area or a jhopdi of that state than a plain area Maharashtra and Uttar Pradesh. So is it a governance issue or is it demand not being there? We need to seriously think about it. And therefore, when we talk of this energy transition, we have to ask, is it the energy transition for the top 1%? Incidentally, Rahul Tongia is ruining the fact that Karnataka, 97% of the households are getting electricity. Go through our paper on NSSO data, MPC class-based electricity consumption, the top decile, we have actually called it runaway decile. The top decile has decoupled itself from India. You should look at their energy consumption. It is to be seen, to be believed. Is it efficient energy consumption? That is the group for which electricity tariff should be tripled. Let the Adanis and Ambanis make money from that top 1% and not from the bottom 80%. Okay? And so therefore there are issues related to efficiencies, but efficiencies at the top of the pyramid. Because if you do sober, dispassionate calculation, reducing inefficiency at the top of the pyramid has enough for taking away the treasury and misery at the bottom of the pyramid. So last I will come to this question. So therefore when we talk of remedy, let's ask ourselves this question. Finally I come to the question of what is called niyat and quwwat. Your intention and your capacity. And Toyama, who is a best design expert, his famous paper in Harvard Business Review, what he says, technology can magnify your intent. Technology doesn't create your intent. So if it is good, technology can make it better. If it is better, technology can make it the best. But bad to good, technology doesn't do it, it's your intention. Now you may not worry about Toyama, कि ये बहुत academic बोलता है professor. How many of you have seen Chak De India? Okay, good. What does Shah Rukh Khan say there? कि मैं नियत नहीं, कुव्वत खोज रहा हूँ. मैं कुव्वत नहीं, नियत खोज रहा हूँ. So I think when we talk in terms of the electricity transition in India, we have to ask ourselves कि आप सरकार की कुव्वत खोज रहे हैं? Every muscle flexing सरकार shows their कुव्वत. You have to ask आपकी नियत क्या है? नियत सही है तो electrification will happen for the bottom 80%. नियत सही नहीं है तो it will happen for the top 3%, mind you, not even top 20%. Thank you.
I think we're in more vigorous agreement than than it appears, because it really is about not just efficiency but equity, and this one of the things that many of us focused on was quality of supply. Because now, even though you are 100% electrified or virtually so, ask yourselves, are we at 24/7 dependable power and then affordable power? So these are some of the challenges that are still being worked through. Turning to you, Rahul, I mean, to build on what Dr. Agnihotri pointed out, you use the point about CBI or CAG or some, or as a secretary at one of our events said, the 4 C's: court, CBI, CBC, and CAG. Why you didn't have as much storage growth or thing is analogous to why we don't have a concept of peaking power. Intuitively, all of us know, and even our grandmother will understand, that not all electricity is the same. 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. or 6 and 6 are not the same. And many of us, how many of you are here old enough to remember standing in line at STD phone booths, subscriber trunk dialing? Let me flip it the other way. How many of you have no clue what the heck I'm talking about? Because growing up, a long distance telephone call between Delhi and over 1,000 kilometers, these were distance based, was in the order of 100 rupees a minute. Back then it's 100 rupees in the 80s per minute. And then you had the explosion of subscriber trunk dialing booths, which were set up for places where people could get telephony access to make calls. And they had congestion pricing, but not quite congestion pricing. Turned out they just had time of day pricing with no link to physical reality. But they had it that you would have half price between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. and 10 p.m. onwards, quarter price. What do you think happened at 9:45? Big queue. So it's a self-negating prophecy. But congestion is something that's intuitively understood. So some of our recent work has been really focusing on this dichotomy that cost, price, and value are not the same. Once we start thinking about value, we'll find new ways to achieve that value. So it's not just storage or storage battery versus different storage versus demand response. It's all of the above. It's a portfolio that we need. And the second sort of observation from that is, assuming you're able to overcome the bean counter who will worry you that why did you pay extra 10 paise for something? Because it's worth more, so what if it costs more or is priced more? And a classic example of that is wind versus solar. India has lagged in the last few years in its wind growth, even though wind is primarily because wind is a little bit more expensive on a levelized cost of energy basis, LCOE. And what a lot of us academics think, scholars are showing is LCOE is a limited use tool. It's useful, but it needs to be enhanced with more, including portfolio level cost pricing. So once you do portfolio, then you'll realize that wind has disproportional value because it is less coincident time-wise as solar is. And that's worth more because the problem we face today is not midday power, and it's not kWh, kilowatt hour per se. It's kW at the right time and at the right place. And we should be and are capable of paying that small premium that deserves. And then yes, we can direct some of that solar power to agricultural uses and so forth. But this involves a rethink of ultimately the social welfare equilibrium that we have today. And that starts with your points. And now I'm throwing it, my job as moderator is to carry the platter to Rahul. Let's assume battery prices are declining, have declined to a threshold. We know that C&I users, commercial and industrial users, cross-subsidize other users. If the day is not too far where they'll say, you know what, A, I've already got this rooftop or renewable obligation upon me. B, let me now enhance that with a little premium storage, but not so much required. It still turns out to be cheaper than going through the discount. Then are they not going to just say, thank you very much, bye-bye? And maybe that's efficient, but then the political question comes back, what do we do about the rest of that equilibrium? So, it's a very easy question for you.
Thank you. It's tough to follow the two stalwarts of the industry. But just, I think before I jump to the answer, I think your example about telephone booth, it reminded me, I think apart from standing in the line, I think one of the first thing I used to do, because I see Mr. Murthy sitting here next to Netra, and I remember that during my engineering days when I was getting career advice, and I used to call like maybe once in a 15 days home. First thing I used to tell, as soon as my mom or dad used to pick up the phone, the first thing I used to say is, oh, one of you call him, so that by the time I give some other judgment complaint, he will come from his house, he was my neighbor, to my house, and I can talk and save on some money on the telephone call. So yeah, it used to be, I think 16 rupees after 10 p.m. per minute at that time. So yeah, I remember those days. Now coming to something in terms of the cost reduction, other thing, I know that yes, everyone is still looking for cheaper storage and other thing, but having seen storage where I was just talking to some of the reporters earlier, that when we worked on first storage projects with AES and Alternano and A123 back in US, the cell level cost was more than $1,000 per kilowatt hour. And what was a key for kickstarting the industry and what worked in US was identifying the applications where even at that price point you could generate enough value to pay for it, not just wait for storage to go down to 100. In fact, many times I feel that as a policymaker, sometimes these targets which gets announced, those actually have a detrimental impact, or even subsidies or incentives sometimes it is done. Because as soon as something is announced, everyone wants to wait for that to happen and not do things. With storage, I think now we have reached a stage where again both Dr. Dave and Dr. Agnihotri played a critical role in early days of it, where I felt actually policymakers or regulators had a lot of power, and that would have been actually game changer. In fact, Dr. Dave took leadership with ancillary services, and he had issued the notification where in June 2017 we should have started procurement of ancillary services. Unfortunately, after he retired, we have still not really started procurement of ancillary services, and that market which should have kickstarted storage deployment in India is still waiting to be happened. On the other hand side, we are now getting individual tenders which are at gigawatt hour scale batteries, but we don't have even 2 companies who have deployed more than 100 megawatt hour of storage in India. So that's a gap which is there, and Dr. Agnihotri had actually a program, and for the pilots what he referred to, that where instead of just looking for going from solar from 6 to 5 to 3 to use some of the viability gap funding for creating pilots. And I was involved in that initial committee. He had made me part of a standing committee, which first time when I heard, I wasn't sure, does that mean that there will be no chair for the committee meeting? Or but he said that's a committee without any end date, because he anticipated that this is not going to be something which will get resolved in 1 year. This will be an ongoing activity, and he created that standing committee. Where, in fact, the initial pilot projects, I think this was back in 2014-15 when this was done. I know at least out of the 10 companies who had applied for it, they had asked for zero viability gap funding. Because that time there were companies who were really interested in doing their first megawatt scale projects in India. Unfortunately, because of some misdirection where someone ended up complaining to the energy minister that, oh, there is no reverse Swiss auction included in selecting the pilot project, that entire thing bid was scrapped without opening the bid document, expecting that, oh, we would have wasted money in doing the pilot, and we are suffering from that. But now I think we are reaching a stage where again we still need to just keep on focusing on applications where it is viable. So some of the earliest, I think, options were that any one customer right now is still using more than 500 hours of diesel in a year, and many people think that that's not happening anywhere, but you will be surprised if you start looking at state by state data, how many states, how many customers are still using that. I think there it's a no-brainer that you can use distributed renewables with storage, and you can actually start saving money from day one. Even in states where especially commercial customers or industrial customers who are paying more than 8 rupees, more than 10 rupees, now you can get RE plus storage at 6.5 rupees as a levelized cost. And that's something which you should be doing, and again, you may not get it for 24/7, so I don't think we are reaching a stage where customers will just get disconnected from DISCOM, but as long as there is no active prevention of allowing customers to use distributed renewables and storing that energy and using it, I'm not even talking about rate maintaining, but as long as you allow that, I think the economics have now reached. So now we just need to make sure that we are not creating additional barriers and allowing that to happen. But ultimately now the biggest challenge I feel for next 5 years for us is the skill development, because we haven't done a lot of things in last maybe 5-6 years which could have actually created a big capacity in India. I think in next 2 years we now have to start actually the asking rate, as Dr. Agnihotri mentioned, is now really up, and we need actually many of you here to play the role of Surya Kumar Yadav, and you need to be a 360 player. You cannot just keep on looking at something small and play too safe and too conservative. But I still believe that we have opportunity to catch up. I think a lot of the things we are looking at as a 2030 as a target, that is still 6 years away. And we need to actually step up the game, not worry about just what is going to happen next. Is there new technology going to come in? Is there someone else is going to set up a gigafactory? Is China is going to do something? Is US is going to do something? Because the key part is globally, with the kind of drive towards sort of a net zero, what is being talked about, and although 2050, 2070 may seem far away, but the general consensus is that if we are talking anywhere in that timeline between 2050 to 70 as a net zero transition, the electricity sector needs to do it at least 15 years before that. Otherwise, we are not going to have any net zero transition at all. And that means we are running out of time. Traditionally, many of these transitions have taken 20, 30, 40 years for it to happen, and we are now expecting this to happen in less than 10 years. And that's where we need to step up and use whatever policymakers have created the platform, but now I think the industry has actually ball in their court, where hopefully some of the remaining barriers will also be removed. A lot of positive steps have been taken in India. Many things, even in US, it took more than 10 years to change happened in India. We achieved it in 5-6 years in terms of the policy changes, and some of the final fine-tuning will still keep on happening, but we are in a good place for looking at next 5-6 years.
Thank you. I will ask our organizers how much time do we have so that we can plan accordingly, because I think we've just gotten started here. Okay, so near 5 to 10, okay. So then I will limit my questions, cut through some of them, and because I want to leave time for some discussion and questions from the audience. Let's come back to just this, not what have we done. I mean, it's, Stephen, you used the phrase journey in your opening remarks, and it's really, this is an evolving space. And you also, Rahul, just mentioned that these transitions take time. It would be idiotic, for lack of a better word, to assume the scale change that we need will happen overnight when we're talking of these transitions. So now, what is it we really do need to do, or what's missing, is my last sort of open question to our panelists before we invite Q&A. You talked about skill building, capacity building. The other sort of, you talk to an economist or a financier and they'll say, oh, it's all about finance. So obviously this space needs money, but some of us believe that if things make sense, the money will come. Money is not per se the bottleneck, but then money links to risk, which relates to, for example, discoms and the political economy question. So what are, I like your phrasing, it's one that we've used in our publications extensively, which is, it's not that is $1,000 a kilowatt hour too much, but let's, even in RE, today we are behind schedule in the ambitious RE targets of the country. Now, at some point in the future, for example, the 2030 targets have 420 GW of wind and solar, 280 solar, 140 wind, as per CEA estimate. Now, at those levels, you will need storage, you will need grid overhauls, you will need regulatory pricing shifts, and so forth. But well before we get there, there's viability in the grid as is to grow wind and solar, and yet we're not even growing that much. So what's holding us back? What are we not doing? Open questions for
capacity building, I would offer a suggestion. When we need to do capacity building, it has to be large scale, decentralized. Come to IIT, talk to Professor Kannan. The spoken tutorials have succeeded in teaching. I will just give 3 examples. Extremely effective. They teach you how to build a ferrocement biogas plant. They teach you how to learn R, and they also teach a mother how to effectively breastfeed the child. Now, the effective breastfeeding has been translated in 22 languages, including Arabic and Persian. And then we found out that the tribal lady in Melghat did not understand Sarkari Marathi or Sarkari Hindi or Angrezi, of course. So we made it in Purku. Now Purku, Bhili, Paudi and Santhali is going on. So if you want to do your training even in Santhali for the tribal youth in Jharkhand, the spoken tutorial will be ready. So that's one fast tracking. Good quality content is what you need to give. And this is the same thing, another assignment to Rajarshi also on that battery, lead acid battery, but we'll talk offline. And your second question was, one was capacity building and second was the
scope. I mean, what do we need to really accelerate? And because the decarbonization challenge needs acceleration.
Yes.
For example, or human equity. I don't worry just about climate change alone, but also quality supply.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. So what happens is in renewable energy, if you compete with power sector on price, you are going to lose all the time. It's like the second law of thermodynamics. TS is greater than that entropy is always greater than zero. Because I heard this conversation, I was sitting there, minister was sitting there, and this power sector producer was sitting there. He said, you bring down the renewable energy cost to 2 rupees, I'll offer you at 1 rupee 10 paise. मैं तो cheap कोयला खरीद के कर दूंगा. My point is renewable energy should make its pitch on the quality of supply. Because today what's happening, the moment you go to talk to anyone, especially the politicians, who are already saying हर घर में लट्टू है उसमें बिजली है, so you will be discounted. We have to make a pitch for quality of supply and reliability of supply, and that is where there's a very interesting thought which came in our mini grid workshop day before yesterday, that the chances for the mini grid to succeed are more in terms of small towns and those chota industrial states rather than the tribal Kijhopadi. So I think we need to, because once you make that pitch that this is where it works, then it percolates down to the tribal Kijhopadi, not the other way around.
One thing I think what's missing right now is I think overall system level approach, right? We end up looking at every tender, every piece of contract as a separate one and just trying to find a lowest cost optimization just for that tender without realizing, okay, that tender is only for the generation part of it. But ultimately, because every time it happens, like whenever we talk about, and we have Dr. Bharat Reddy here who has been last almost 10 years has worked with us through CERC on looking for actually implementing these projects, and he had a tough job of actually going and selling the power ultimately to the utilities. But the problem is everyone keeps on saying that, oh, is it going to be 6 rupees? It is not, it is too costly because I'm just going to be able to buy this solar at a 2.5 rupee. And that understanding about the not just quality of power, but even in terms of just the total delivered cost of the power, that is something which is missing. And that's something, frankly, I am out of ideas. Whatever I could think of, I have tried it.
I mean, we've been, as academics, trying to say, go beyond LCOE, which is silo-based, which is, isolation-based.
Yes. No, one of the biggest thing was, I think, the tenders for Power Gada and others which were there, where actually after doing the tenders, after releasing it, the financial bids were not even open just because the local authorities, the state regulators just refused to say, oh no, why should I pay even a single paise extra for getting firm renewable power if I don't have an obligation to do that? And that's the part where I think we need to do capacity building not just for the masses, but I think even at a regulatory level, we really need to rethink about how do we address that, how do we bring that capacity so that there is little bit forward-looking, little bit holistic thing, and not just looking at, oh, my tenure is next 1 year, and if I can survive it, I'm fine.
Sorry for butting in, but you see what happens is the risks are taken with foresight. Audit is done by hindsight. And I'm being very blunt about it. If you are not a impulsive, rash bureaucrat like me, you will play very sober. I'll mention one actual case where there was a file of 325 crores, one tender. I saw everything very fast and I said, oh, this is straightforward. And I was just going to sign that. One of my deputies had come and he says, sir, वो file देख लिया आपने? I said, हाँ वो तो straightforward है, I'm just going to clear it. He says, sir, can you wait for another 1 day? I'll just check something and come back. I said, okay, and I was in defense, so it is a khatarnak sector. So he came back after 1.5 days and said, sir, kar dijiye sign. I said, but you are going to give me some input? He said, no, there is no input. I got a little cheesed off. I said, I was going to do it day before yesterday, the same afternoon. He said, no one should ask a question. Why did you clear the 325 crore ka file in 3 hours flat? You should do it over 2 days. So when we are operating in this kind of atmosphere, kindly don't expect the regulator to be a risk taker. वो उसके घर पे 6 साल बाद a tendentious auditor, vigilance officer, worst case CBI will come and say आपने अच्छा काम क्यों किया?
I agree. So maybe we should expand that capacity building even to include auditors. And the other thing which I think I had tried to figure out if there is any way out at maybe at a level of regulatory commissions more than state and center. Where what I have always found out is whenever we are having one-on-one interaction with most of the regulators, I have not found any regulator who has not understood the topic. The only thing is it happens that most of the times the final decisions are done at a committee in a closed door, and there are some decision makers or some influencers who end up changing it everything after everything is explained. Like there are some meetings, some aspects like ancillary services. At least I have gone through more than a dozen one-on-one meetings where it felt like everything was answered, everything was clear and it will go through, but it has not happened. So is there any possibility like something like in US FERC does the notice of proposed rulemaking, then there are open hearings where anyone who has objection can come in, talk, people in favor, people against it, both discuss, the staff of the regulatory commission hears it, and then there is a open ruling made based on looking at merits of both. And at least I have found out in US that process was very helpful in getting some of the changes done. I don't know if that is possible in India or not.
But the first step is there. In the sense there are public consultations, drafts issued, for example.
Yes.
But it's that step from there to the end where
Yes.
you have some concerns.
Yeah, because even after all the discussions, and now I'm part of the Central Advisory Committee for last 3 years for CERC, but still I see there is some gap where after all those discussions, still the final decision making, sometimes it feels that 1 or 2 entities can actually change the decision. I don't know if there is any solution.
So,
The problem is that electricity sector is completely dominated by government, state government or central government. That's the issue. Now, what happened in telecom, because I was a private secretary to Minister for Communication, 83 to 84, those days you had to have category, general category and OIT. And OIT category was quite expensive, you had to pay. And when Minister had this, some political pressure also, give some connection. Here as a policy, I will give connection only if you have OIT bid listed. Otherwise, I'm not going to give that. But there were offers. Personally, somebody had come from Mumbai, offering 10,000 rupees per connection because he knew that I could sign for minister if I issued that order. So that being the case, today, change in telecom was, now there is nowhere MTNL, BSNL, what happened to that. It is the private sector. They are competing. So again the dream was when we started with the electricity reform that we are going to have now private sector taking over, but that never did happen. Today when we talk about discoms, discoms are about nothing, but they are just the extension of state governments. So that being the case, so it is a complete hold of that. Now to get over that becomes the political question. What do the politicians want and how do you really address that? So that means, again it comes back to the same thing that if you want to give cheap power to certain category of consumers, who pays for it? It has to come from the budgets, state budget. The state budget means, I'm not saying it has to really come from state budget, because now you have GST, it can come from anywhere. But that money has to come. But do you expect any chief minister agreeing to hand over his discoms to private sector? There are only 2 states where Delhi is an exception. Delhi is not has any rural district. And why Orissa was selected by World Bank? Because Orissa had very low agriculture. That was the reason. So it failed, and again they went back. So again, that's the very important thing now. How do we get rid of this specter of government control, interest control? That is the important thing. The private sector has shown it is competitive, but they are not going to be competing in the areas where they cannot handle at all. Which comes to the rural area, that's the problem.
Yes.
Just a 30-second add-on. I think rather than ruing about this impasse, I think if you aim at meso-level private sector experiment, okay, this has chance of working. And why I'm saying this is CSR is one source which is where a lot of entities are looking for good innovative ideas which can then go as a best practice. So it gives them visibility, it gives you your proof of concept, and if 5-6 such cases which are meso level. Our problem is if we can't hit a sixer, we say we will not take a single run. Now that's a bad strategy. You keep stealing single runs, your scoreboard keeps going up. So you have a choice. I mean, either wait for the sixer till your children retire or steal a single.
So I think this is a great suggestion. So I helped set up the smart grid space in India, and I'm founding advisor of India Smart Grid Forum. There were a lot of pilots to use, how do we innovate? And the problem is there was a blurring of the lines between a learning pilot and a deployment pilot. And what we really need is more not technology-oriented piloting at all, because technologies are well understood. It's business model innovation and risk, where you should be willing to say, you know what, maybe this will succeed, maybe this will not, but we'll sandbox it so that people can at least learn from it better and then realize how to iterate upon these solutions. So I think what I'm taking away is this is of course complex, this is evolving. It's going to keep the likes of you and maybe a little bit of us busy and employed for many years to come. We have time for maybe one burning question, if there is, from the audience, and there's obviously several hands that have come up. We could limit it to a very brief, just very briefly, sir, if I could request, and also to introduce yourself.
I am Kushal Banerjee, Chief General Manager from Hindustan Petroleum, representing an oil and gas company, a fossil fuel company, and the topic is very relevant what we discussed. I just wanted to talk about.
So if I could request you not to share something, but rather if there's
no, I just wanted to, whatever it has been discussed, are we talking about the elephant in the room related to climate change? We have talked about all those areas, what is to be done and all. Today, 135 districts of India are coal dependent. I'm specifically talking about East Zone, and 40 crore people are dependent on that. Today, COP28 starts. Does our manifesto, it is written that we are going to go for a coal-moved Bharat? Can we take that decision? That's the elephant in the room of climate change. Who, as we have talked about the political leadership, who will have in the manifesto written that we are going for this move Bharat, and declare for your benefit, for your long-term this, we are going to do this rather than hitting sixes or singles and all this. Are we going to do that? Is that commitment there? I'm talking about that particular elephant in the room. Somebody has to come out and talk about it. Will it happen?
It is, so one more elephant other than the agriculture is on the coal. We'll collect the last question from the back. And sorry if there isn't time to get to everyone. But I think our panelists will be available during a tea break and we can continue the conversation. Could we get a mic to, or if you could come towards a mic.
Thank you. I do have a burning question. My name is Chetan and I am leading sustainability activities for our members at MCI, Maharashtra Chamber of Commerce and Industry and Agriculture. You talked about decarbonization, digitalization and decentralization. There are 3 more Ds and it links with the governance inefficiency of these cons. So how can you bring in a governance index with other 3 Ds, which is first one is the disruption, which talks about the problem statement. The second one is the divergence, and the third is diversity. So how can we, tell government to come up with a governance index for discoms, so that there will be a win-win business model. Otherwise, the government efficiency links directly with the inefficient business model, and that doesn't help economic development. That's the question. Thank you.
So I'll just observe that your span of what you're leading to overlaps with some of the others, where we right now are doing too much socialization and averaging. We're not finding the efficiencies because the data themselves are limited, the data are not public in the right levels, and so this prevents certain tweaks. So to quote, to use a Silicon Valley phrase, maybe that's a feature and not a bug. So for every bottleneck that's there, there are winners in the scope of winners and losers. But for the other elephant in the room, I think that's a longer conversation unless someone has a short answer to that. But Koila obviously is here, it's important. And I don't think anyone is saying it will disappear overnight. The question is, how graceful will the phase down of coal be, is something that is a work in progress. I mean, I open it up to any last words on that elephant in the room.
Coal in relative terms will go down, in absolute terms will go up. That's the reality that you need to live with. If you look at India's per capita carbon consumption per annum, it is way below the world average. That's something which is inescapable. That does not mean that you therefore continue what I call the inefficiency at the top of the pyramid. And in operational term, there is a very good point which Kamleshwar, the famous Hindi writer, makes, and I always quote him. अहमियत इस बात की नहीं है कि आप कहाँ हैं, अहमियत इस बात की जहाँ आप हैं वहाँ क्या कर रहे हैं. आप वो नहीं करेंगे, परोपदेशे पांडित्यम करेंगे तो ये ऐसे ही रहेगा.
So just on that, just as we have a book on future of coal in India, it's on our website with a lot of summaries. The per capita coal consumption, not just carbon. If you normalize for the quality of coal, most global statistics are based on tons of coal, but if you normalize for the quality of coal, the per capita 2019 consumption of coal was half the world average. So even Germany and the US were triple or 2.5 to 3 times higher per capita. But the difference is for India, that's 54% of our energy, while for them it's in the sort of teens, 13 to 17% range. And they use a lot more oil and gas. And that's the trade-off. The world has sort of found coal to be the problem. It is a problem, it's not the problem. And if you don't look at the holistic picture of climate change, I think different countries will want different solutions. So that is what is up for discussion at COP. Let's meet over drinks, I think, needed in the evening to see what happened in COP. With that, I want to thank our panelists for a very riveting discussion, both remembering the past, which is not just reminiscence, because it really guides us to why we are where we are today, which then opens up the doors of where we can go going forward. Thank you, Dr. Dev, Dr. Walawalkar, Dr. Agnihotri, and